Bicker, as you know, in 2008, former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens authored the majority opinion upholding Indiana's voter ID requirement as both constitutional and a reasonable requirement to ensure the integrity of the election process. Other states, such as Kansas, Arizona, Georgia, and Alabama, are now requiring proof of citizenship when you register to vote. Question. Do you support requiring a government-issued ID to vote, and do you support requiring individuals who register to vote to provide proof of citizenship?
Well, they have a government-issued ID requirement to vote in India, which is a poor country to a very large extent. You know, I went down and listened with Neil Parrott, our distinguished legislator from Washington County, to the voter ID bill, which was crucified by the Democrats in Annapolis. And they argued, well, poor people will be hurt. They can't afford to have voter IDs. They have it in India, where the annual income is far less. And by the way, I did want to, since you're mentioning judges, I did want to mention Dino Flores, who is running for circuit court judge here in Frederick County, who was in the audience. He was an outstanding prosecutor, and I certainly hope that Governor Hogan appoints Dino Flores to the Frederick County Circuit Court. I love the judges in Western Maryland. I'm in front of them each and every day. We have one of the best benches anywhere in Western Maryland. They're fair, they're reasonable, they've got the common touch.
Thank you very much.
We have great judges here.
Super. Mr. Painter.
Could you repeat the second half of that?
Yeah. It's voter ID. Do you support it? And some states are now requiring proof of citizenship when you register to vote. A Circuit Court of Appeals, the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, has actually upheld that. That case will no doubt go to the Supreme Court. Mr. Painter?
Yeah, I definitely support an ID to show that you are who you claim you are when you show up to vote. And I think that, I mean, you shouldn't be allowed to vote or register to vote if you're not a U.S. citizen. And you should have to prove that when you register. I don't see the issue. It's cut and dry.
Mr. Baker?
Yes, one of the most precious freedoms and rights that we have as Americans, the right to vote. And, you know, we are a free country. We have a right to vote. I have not a problem with voter ID and proof of citizenship in order to be able to vote. Thank you.
All right, folks, let's turn our attention to foreign policy. Obviously, it's on the minds of a lot of people. Our national security is something you all have all spoken eloquently about. I want to probe your thinking on that. Ms. Hope, Afghanistan, the country from which the 9/11 attacks originated, is still unstable and risks once again becoming a safe haven for global terrorists seeking harm against the United States. Our president had hoped to establish a legacy as the president who extricated the U.S. from two wars, Afghanistan and Iraq. However, now we've seen what a precipitous U.S. troop withdrawal in Iraq has done, and we've seen the Islamic State, which has been able to capture territory. What policies do you support to prevent Afghanistan from destabilizing like Iraq?
I think we need to maintain a presence there on the ground of our military that is trained to deal with this sort of conflict. And it is a conflict, it is a war. It's being handled differently than what we used to call major regional conflicts or MRCs. It is not likely to be attackable by battalions, brigades, divisions, former units of the military. It needs to be handled mostly by people who are used to winning hearts and minds. It needs to be the civil service, what do they call them, civil affairs portions of the uniformed military. But we need to maintain a presence there to keep it from destabilizing like Iraq.
Mr. Baker? Pull the microphone closer if you could, sir.
I don't know why I'm having a hard time keeping it up here.
There you go.
I'll keep it on my notes. Obviously, Afghanistan, all the terrorists and all the bombings that we've had here on our own soil, everything going on over in that country. And we often talk about war, to go to war, not to go to war. They are our enemies, and I really think it is definitely the Congress's responsibility. It's their duty to tell the president and to go to war to fight off the enemies. Our number one objective, our number one goal is to keep Americans safe, and we should be providing the resources to our commander-in-chief for him to be able to do his job. Thank you.
Mr. Vogt, remind us, did you serve in Afghanistan or Iraq or both?
I did serve in Afghanistan in 2010 and 11.
Tell us your thoughts, sir.
Our biggest problem with both these wars is we rushed in with absolutely no plan of how we were going to handle them or how we were going to eventually get out. Then we also tied the hands of the men and women we put over there. Tell you from Joint Task Force rules and regulations, Army regulations, NATO regulations, Navy regulations, and Marine Corps regulations, all of which I had to read and try not to fall asleep with when I deployed to Afghanistan, is a bunch of bureaucracy and rules of law and rules of engagement that don't let our men and women do their job when, in fact, we do know it's an enemy. Those are the biggest problems with these two wars we run into. We saw with Iraq pulling out too quickly was a mistake. We need to make sure it's going to be stable, but at this point in time, our biggest and most important decision needs to be tell NATO and the rest of the world to stand up and do what we've been doing for decades, because we've been carrying the burden all alone and they aren't doing their fair share. We make them stand up and be accountable, we can balance it, maintain stability, and still move on.
So we've invited the public to ask questions before this debate, and a local citizen named Jeff Brown asks the following question. Do you support Governor Hogan in refusing to allow unvetted Syrian refugees from coming to Maryland? And I'll turn first to Mr. Howard. And if so, why? Since vetting refugees is solely a federal responsibility.
I do support Governor Hogan's action, and in fact that day took to social media and applauded what he did. Jeff Brown makes a very good point about vetting. In the Western world, you can vet and have a fairly high degree of certainty that when you've gone through your vetting process, and there are professionals that do this for a living, that you really have either weeded that person out or you have vetted that they're okay. When you come from a war-torn, how to put this delicately, somewhat poor, backward country that is being blown to bits by foreign occupying forces, there's not a lot of infrastructure to begin with, and so there's not a whole lot to look at. It's the old computer algorithm, computer programming saying garbage in, garbage out. So if there's not a whole lot there to vet, you can't vet. So I applaud Governor Hogan for standing up to John Delaney's ridiculous idea that we can bring in more than the 10,000 into this country that the Obama administration requested and speed up the vetting. The vetting may actually be impossible, Cully, much less able to be sped up. So I fully support Governor Hogan saying until we get it right, no, not here.
Mr. Picker?
I support almost everything that Governor Hogan does. My son and I ran with him in District 15. We visited 60,000 houses over an 18-month period, advancing ourselves for legislature.
So the question is, Syrian
and Governor Hogan for governor. He's right. We have to vet these people that are coming in. The problem is, in Syria, you can't find out what their background is. You can't search their criminal records. You don't know if they're mass murderers or who they are. I want to keep the people of the 6th District safe. I don't want to have a refugee who comes over here with nefarious purpose and goes to a University of Maryland basketball game and sets off some kind of explosive device and kills a lot of young people, or at Montgomery Mall, or at the Francis Scott Key Mall. We have to keep Americans safe. Marylanders say, Western Marylanders say, and when Governor Hogan looks down on Capitol Hill, he's going to think he's looking at a mirror, because he's going to see himself down there standing up for Hogan values, and that's what I'm going to do on Capitol Hill. I know Governor Hogan, he's my friend, and I know his dad, and he's my friend too. And whatever they support, believe me, the chances are very good I'll support it.
So, Mr. Mason, at the Montgomery County GOP debate, you said, quote, "We should stop all immigration right now."
That's
quote,
right.
unquote. Put more words around that.
Well, we got 100 million people either out of work, looking for work, or have jobs that don't pay what they were paying. If you have 100 million people out of work, how can you bring in more people who are out of work at the same time and fill up that same population level? And it's not that I agree with Hogan, we should be able to vet people, and if we can't, they shouldn't come in. But the problem isn't should or shouldn't we vet people. The problem is we shouldn't allow people in the first place. This is a Trojan horse. Look at San Bernardino. All these people are coming in from places that we don't know, and the places but the countries we do know they're coming from are some of the most violent places that they're coming in from. I don't agree that we should allow people to come in from countries that hate us and would like to kill us if they got their hands on us.
Let's turn our attention to defense spending. Mr. Vogt, as you know, the Obama administration has slashed defense spending in the last 7 years. In fact, defense spending is at its lowest level in many, many years. Top military leaders have testified before Congress that defense spending is, quote, dangerously low, and we are getting to the point where we cannot adequately defend our national interests. I assume from your comments in previous debates you support an increase in defense spending, but what should the top line defense budget number be? And if you can't put a number around it, what at least are your priorities with respect to defense spending?
The numbers, putting an explicit number on it is nearly impossible to do because the moving target that we see in the global economy, then that's going to change. What we've got to do is make sure they've got the tools and the resources to do their job. One area is we've got planes that are 2 generations beyond expired. We've got nuclear subs that are disintegrating, and we're not in an international posture to be able to even defend ourselves adequately against the threats that we see in Iran, Russia, North Korea, and then we've got to be able to do something about that. And military infrastructure is one area we've got to focus that spending, and providing the support of our men and women. Where we balance that is we stop building other nations with billions and billions of dollars that should be here.
Mr. Howard, Mr. Vogt says infrastructure and supporting our men and women. What are your thoughts?
I was fortunate enough to go to one of the Heritage Foundation briefings, and I was impressed with every one of the presenters, the experts who briefed me as a candidate for Congress on various topics, and I don't remember the name, but the one who briefed me on defense spending was the most impressive. I was very impressed. I don't remember the number, 600 and some billion, 700. There was a number, and it's not big enough. I support increasing the defense budget to get the mission accomplished, because the first job of the federal government, the primary job of the federal government, is to keep us safe. And I would add, while simultaneously preserving our rights and our liberties. And to the extent that it doesn't do both, it has failed. Our federal government has failed. So that it does not fail, I think that we need to reprogram our thinking, and we need to put defense spending at, as Delegate Vogt said, at whatever it needs to be to enable our fighting forces and our intel apparatus to do the job and keep us safe. And I support that both for traditional warfare as well as the new asymmetrical warfare. We need a national strategy for defeating our enemies and keeping our country safe.
Mr. Painter, defense spending, up, down, just right?
Well, if there's going to be more defense spending, I mean, it's a long story. We got to control the
Give us a
debt.
90-second story.
We got to control the debt. There can't be sacred cows. If we're going to cut our spending and we want to increase defense, we've got to look to our allies. World War I, we had allies. World War II, we had allies. We've got to make our allies step up to the plate. If there's trouble with China, why should we do it all? If there's trouble with Russia, why should we do it all? Let Germany and France and England stand up with us in Russia and the other NATO countries. Let Japan stand up with us over there in China. We've got to quit being not just the world's policeman, but financing being the world's policeman. They have more to lose than we do. China's a hell of a lot further away from us than it is from Japan. Russia's a lot further away from us than it is from Germany. Let them pick up the ball. We'll work with them. That's my story.
Well, speaking of China, this next question goes to Mr. Ficker, Mr. Mason, and then Dr. Chang, in that order. Mr. Ficker, since 2013 or so, China has been engaged in a massive land reclamation program among a string of artificial islands in the South China Sea. They claim that they have, quote, no intention to militarize those islands, yet, if you look at the satellite photos, it's very clear that the infrastructure on Fiery Cross Reef and the Spratly Islands has a military installation, mile-long air base, a deep water port. Our Navy has conducted 2 freedom of navigation exercises in the South China Sea, basically to say, look, this is international waters. Question: is the administration right in conducting freedom of navigation exercises in the South and East China Seas? And if so, what should our defense posture be towards China?
I don't want to see China expanding beyond its present boundaries if that's what they have in mind, just like the Russians have done into Ukraine. And very likely a strong naval U.S. presence will act to rebut their thoughts and their efforts. We need to have a strong U.S. naval presence in that part of the world. Look what the North Koreans and their nuclear capability. At the same time, I don't want to alienate the Chinese. We have to work with them because they are putting the pressure on North Korea to stay within North Korea's boundaries. I agree with Donald Trump about trade with China. We have a $500 billion deficit with Chinese trade. We need to even that out. We're not winning anymore with them. They're winning the trade wars with us. I believe in being friendly, not being disagreeable, but certainly disagreeing with their expansionistic policies as evidenced in the China Sea and their expansionistic currency manipulations that are bringing jobs overseas, like Apple, for instance, and taking them out of the United States. I'm America first, I'm Maryland first, I'm Western Maryland first. That's going to be my credo, and I'm more interested in what's happening here in Western Maryland than I am in the West China Sea.
Thank you.
But I do believe in a strong Navy presence there.
Thank you. Mr. Mason.
Well, you see this around the world. We have a weak president. America's enemies are on the march. China's no difference. We do it just like we did Cuba. We put a ring of ships around those islands, stop any flow of Chinese traffic to go to those islands, because it is international waters, and we have the right to do so. We get our allies on board to do the same, and we pressure China to stop doing what they're doing. And I don't care what China thinks. We got to stop caring what other countries think. Let's start caring what we think. South Korea can take care of itself. South Korea can take care of North Korea. They have a much better military, and they can take care of them. So let's not worry about what China does or doesn't do. But in this case, we should put an embargo around that area and not allow China to keep building up those islands.
Dr. Chang, are you willing to go as far as Mr. Mason? Yeah. Embargo?
Yeah, I
a naval embargo like we did?
Let me answer.
Hold on. Let me ask you a question. Are you willing to go as far as Mr. Mason and support essentially a embargo, a ring of ships around Fiery Cross Reef to deny China the ability to weaponize that place?
Okay, let me answer this question for this issue. Okay, this issue for me kind of hard because I come from China. I'm Chinese American. I appreciate American. Before I answer these questions, let me tell you some history about China and the USA. During the Second World War, that American fly tigers fly to China to defeat Japan. Chinese very appreciate American help and support. China and USA is bigger country. Both countries are bigger. In some way, they cooperate. In some way, they compete. I have experience with China and USA. If I'm elected, my experience will be beneficial to USA. As a good politician, it is important to protect our population and avoid war happen. If I'm elected, I will work on it. Thank you for the questions.
All right, it's our last lightning round, and I probably will shoot myself in the foot for giving you the ability to answer more than one word, but I'll let you have a whole sentence. All right. But if you can do one word, I'll give you bonus points. All right. I'll give you an extra handful of chips after the debate. We'll start down here with you, Mr. Mason, typewriter up to the left side, and Dr. Chang will work from you. There's only 2 questions. Mr. Mason, do you support keeping the terrorist detention facility at Guantanamo Bay open?
Absolutely.
Mr. Painter?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
Yes. Have we ever been able to trust the prisoners that we have over there?
Without a doubt.
Yes.
I'd rather have them be there than here in the United States where they might escape and hurt our precious people, I'll tell you that.
That was one sentence. That was really good.
Yes.
Dr. Chang?
Yes.
All right. Dr. Chang, starting with you. In your opinion, is Edward Snowden a criminal or a whistleblower?
Who?
Edward Snowden, the person who leaked all the documents about the NSA and other national security secrets.
Oh yeah,
WikiLeaks.
Snowden. Dr. Snowden.
Edward Snowden.
Oh yes, Snowden.
Is he a criminal?
It's criminal. Yes.
Mr. Ficker.
I disapprove strongly of what he's done.
Very well.
My answer is a little different. I think what he did was criminal, clearly, and I also believe that he's a whistleblower.
Mr. Vogt.
He's a traitor and should be treated as one.
Without question, criminal traitor.
Absolutely agree, and I think he's also a coward because he wants more time.
Yeah, I think it's true.
I think he's a whistleblower and just didn't go through the right means to get it done.
Now, somebody brought up North Korea, and let me ask a question about that. Let me start with you, Ms. Hofer. You all agree from the previous debates that a nuclear Iran or a nuclear North Korea is just totally unacceptable. But just this week, North Korea showcased its newest atomic device to the media. And yesterday, Iran fired 2 ballistic missiles, a Qadar missile that hit targets 870 miles away in the southern part of Iran. Each missile had a range of over 1,000 miles. Those 2 were on top of other missile tests earlier this month. Vice President Biden, speaking from Israel, said, quote, "A nuclear-armed Iran is an absolutely unacceptable threat to Israel," unquote, and that if Iran broke the terms of the nuclear deal, quote, "we will act," unquote. Each of you is against the Iran deal. You made that very clear. But what policies do you support besides getting rid of the deal? What can and should Congress do with respect to Iran and North Korea? Ms. Hofer.
The first thing that needs to be done is we need to regain the respect around the world that we have lost during the Obama administration. When our president says, "I've drawn a red line, and if you cross it, if you use chemicals, we will do something," and then Iran does cross the red line and we don't do anything, we have lost an enormous amount of world respect. And I think until we regain our respect, we have no power to do anything else. I am seriously concerned about the threat to Israel. I am seriously concerned about the threat to the United States from North Korea. When they can launch a satellite that goes over our Super Bowl during a game, And they weren't doing it just to watch the game, I assure you. I don't think they understand American football. I think what we have to do is first regain our military capability, regain the respect around the world by keeping our commitments, get rid of the Iran agreement. I've written several papers on that are posted on my website, and we have to show that we are strong enough to stand up for ourselves, and only that way will we be able to take any action at all.
Thank you. Mr. Baker?
How interesting our President Biden in Israel and wants to talk about protecting Israel after what they did with the Iran deal. But North Korea, I think it's pretty simple. They want the same deal Iran got. Why would you even cut a deal with Iran in the first place? I think we all were young enough to remember everything that's occurred. Just go back to the tie yellow ribbon around the old oak tree days. But again, Iran's always hated us. They always will. They burn our flag. North Korea hates us, and they know that they want the same deal that Iran received. So why wouldn't they be doing what they're doing? We're not going to do anything to them other than cave and under this administration and give them the deal that they want. So,
Mr. Painter?
thank you.
I think we should use both political and economic pressure on both of these regimes. They're both nuts. You can't really negotiate with a mad dog. If we can get them in line through economic pressure, through political pressure, that's fine. If not, we tell them, look, you might develop a World War II type A bomb, you throw one in Israel, we will lay waste to Iran with more nuclear weapons than you can ever dream of. We will annihilate your entire country. And tell them in no uncertain terms and back it up. Do it if you have to. Kill them all. It's my story.
Mr. Ficker, I'm interested in your thinking about this.
Well, as far as North Korea is concerned, I look at the way they treat their own people with inadequate nourishment, the enslavement, the suppression of ideas, of speech, and I'm fearful about that type of treatment expanding beyond its borders. They've already engaged in a world war, and the potential is there to do it again, especially with nuclear weapons. And Iran could be a very dangerous country if indeed they have nuclear weapons, and we want to make sure they do not have them, and a Trump Cruz Ficker ticket will make sure they don't.
All right, we have two more questions. They're both on foreign policy. Start with you, Mr. Baker. And this is to Mr. Baker, Dr. Chang, and then Ms. Hoper. The United States, as we all know, has been in a state of armed conflict, at war, since 9/11. It passed the Congress passed the authorization for use of military force, the AUMF, a week after 9/11. That targeted Al-Qaeda, the Afghan Taliban, and associated forces. ISIS was not even in existence when we passed that 2001 AUMF. It was formed in 2004 when it was called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI. Members of both the House and Senate from both parties and the President have drafted ISIS-specific AUMFs in the last few years. Question: do you believe we are at war with ISIS? And if so, do you think the 2001 AUMF covers them? Or, as Congress has been debating and will be debating again this year, do we need a new war authorization to cover ISIS? Mr. Baker?
If we're not at war with ISIS, we should be. ISIS is certainly at war with us. And all you have to do is go back and you start looking at all of the events that have occurred in and around the United States, and all we're doing is, at least it appears to me, that we're just sitting back, letting it come to us, and I don't see a whole lot of bombing and a whole lot of war going on from the United States. Again, I think the Commander-in-Chief should have already been after ISIS and all of the other terrorist groups, and we need to be taking the war to them. We shouldn't be waiting on them to bring the war to us. We should take and keep Americans safe first. Thank you.
So, Dr. Chang, as a member of Congress, if this Congress doesn't take up an ISIS AUMF, which they probably will this fall, that will happen next spring when you're a newly sworn member of Congress. Do we
Yes.
need an ISIS AUMF, or are you good with the 2001 AUMF?
Yes, usually. American said it's important. American security is top priority. We have to destroy ISIS and the terrorists before they bring the bomb to USA. We need them, destroy them before anything happens. This is my point.
Ms. Hofer?
I would recommend that we pass a new authorization, but I would make it even broader than just ISIS. I would make it for the entire terrorist network, of which ISIS is only a major component. It certainly isn't the only component. It's not the only component that threatens us. It's not the only component that threatens our allies, both in Europe and in Israel. And so I would broaden it to a declaration against terrorist organizations that threaten us.
So, I appreciate that. Let me drill down on that a little bit. Senator Lindsey Graham proposed the following ISIS AUMF, and it says, quote, "The President is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against ISIS and associated forces, period." You happy with that one?
Yes, I would be happy with that one.
By a show of hands, who was happy with that ISIS AUMF?
I'm happy with that, but not with Lindsey Graham.
All right.
That wasn't the question.
Okay, last question. And then when we finish the last question, each candidate has a minute to wrap up and give us their concluding remarks.